When you think of a traditional protagonist, what comes to mind first? Maybe something like a hero, or someone that's easy to root for, a character who faces struggles but still inspires those around them. Often they're charismatic and stand in the way of injustice. The same traits that make them hard to get along with in universe are also endearing. But what about a character that's the inverse? One that's hard for audiences to relate to, confusing more often than they are empathetic. These types of characters are all over media as rivals, villains, and chaotic forces in the world. But rarely are they the protagonist, because it's hard to pull off. But some writers make it work, and it's becoming more common. So I want to look at two prime examples from shows I've spent a lot of time talking about lately. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about protagonists that feel alien. So what is a quote alien unquote character? For today's video, it focuses on characters that are specifically structured to get in the way of audience connection. Normally stories heavily utilize empathy, especially for point of view characters, but we'll get to that in a second. However, sometimes a mysterious character can be intriguing, thrilling, or comedic. Less extreme examples of what I'd define as alien characters are Sasuke from Naruto and Levi from Attack on Titan. On the other side of the spectrum, you get characters like L from Death Note, or leaving anime, Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. These characters are all structured to be disconnected from the audience, especially at first. Some of them stay disconnected until the very end, while others become highly empathetic. But what about protagonists? Point of view main characters in which a story is told. There are examples of alien protagonists that have been used in very similar ways to their side character counterparts. Take for example Nightcrawler, an incredibly well-received 2014 thriller, built around an oddball and in some ways off-putting crime photographer. Or another example that I think highlights my point is the difference between the protagonists in the shows You and Dexter. If you look at the first season of these two shows, Dexter's played to be empathized with, still different and non-conforming, but a character that the audience can relate to and root for. Whereas with You, it's a story that provides insight into a madman. And I know in these two examples, one is a villain protagonist and the other is a more traditional lead. It's more about the intention in which the characters are portrayed to the audience. Part of what makes alien protagonists such an interesting archetype is the fact that for most protagonists, empathy is a really important tool in crafting the character. Death Note's another show that engages a lot with this archetype, both in its protagonist Light and the person in his way, L. But all of these examples are thrillers. What if we go to the opposite side of the spectrum? Comedy is another genre where alien characters are really common. There are two American sitcoms about literal aliens in human bodies studying human culture. Both Mork and Mindy, which aired in '78, and Third Rock from the Sun, which aired in 1996, utilize characters that are fascinated and bewildered by mundane everyday parts of our culture. It works as a form of observational humor, highlighting the weird intricacies of things that we just deem to be normal. Reminding me of this old anthropology paper about the Nasarima, or American backwards. It was written as a commentary on the way anthropology and sociology would take foreign cultures and ritualize them, taking them out of context and treating them like an exotic centerpiece. A lot of cultural norms are pretty weird in a vacuum. When characters are unfamiliar or disconnected from those norms, it lends itself to humor. Going back to the less literal alien protagonists, there are a couple examples in anime where this archetype is obviously played for laughs. Saitama from One Punch Man is a perfect protagonist for its satirical premise. If a superhero really were overpowered, it wouldn't make for very good drama. Making the strongest person in a story's universe simple, bored, and apathetic is a really subversive decision. Well, at least it was at the time. Earlier in this video, I argued that the alien protagonist is becoming more common, with tons of strong recent examples like Mob from Mob Psycho, or Denji from Chainsaw Man, or the focus of today's video, Frieren from Frieren Beyond Journey's End, or Laios from Dungeon Meshi, otherwise known as Delicious in Dungeon. Really, this video is about taking this archetype that seems recurring, one that I've really grown to love that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and looking at two examples of it to try to understand it better. So let's start first with the internet's favorite elf. Frieren is a non-traditional story built around an even more non-traditional protagonist, asking the question, what happens after the hero's journey? Instead of following the traditional protagonist, we look at what would often be the side character, an everlasting elf over 1,000 years old. Both her circumstance and temperament lead to a generally apathetic way of engaging in life. In many ways, she's disconnected and uninterested, carrying herself with a personality that can be initially described as flat and monotone. Protagonists are the catalyst in which a story is told, so to introduce a character that on the surface seems so simple is a bold take. For Saitama in One Punch Man, for example, it's used to play into the satirical nature of the show. But with Frieren, it's played sincerely because there's more to her story than we initially see. Her personality is a major component of what makes her arc work so well. Storytelling, especially through the lens of the protagonist, is often built around growth, change, conflict that forces a character out of their comfort zone and to adjust. Elves in media are consistently introduced as creatures that can live thousands of years, yet somehow they're often written like any other character. There should be an impact in the story to making a writing decision like that, which is what all of Frieren is built around. It's all structured around a premise that's incredibly intuitive. A majority of the audiences I've seen disliking Frieren have to do with two major components. Number one, arguing it's overhyped, which will happen with any popular piece of media, and number two, the introduction of the story, the way it begins, its pacing, its characters, all components that I think demonstrate an immense amount of depth but are initially oversimplified. I remember reading a while back that Frieren was originally meant to be played like Konosuba in One Punch Man, a satirical comedy making fun of cliched trope. But it sounds like the author stumbled upon something much more sincere, and it works really well. Frieren is a character that is not just flat, she offers a wide range of personality quirks. But throughout the entire story, no matter how much you grow to empathize with her, there's still a barrier between her norm and what seems intuitive. I find myself drawn more and more to stories that feel unique. As I surround myself with tons of media that I'm constantly analyzing, I think I've become the target audience for writers that want to do something subversive. Another show that snuck up on me that was incredibly engaging is Dungeon Meshi, otherwise known as Delicious in Dungeon. It's another story that appears to be one thing but ends up being much more. A lot of the major character development and exploration end up coming later in the series. Laios is a socially inept dungeon-crawling adventurer obsessed with monsters. The premise of the story is built around this limited amount of time and a lack of resources forcing the party back into the dungeon. With no food, they decide to turn towards their only source, engaging in a small taboo, generally reserved for criminals or people avoiding the surface, preparing meals from monsters. And the show doesn't avoid the unappealing sound of it, taking tons of creatures that we associate with classical fantasy and finding interesting ways to explore their now proposed biology. They exist in an ecosystem. It's a fun and simple premise, and it's all driven by the in-universe practicality and the protagonist's obsession. Laios is a very well-written character, and part of the reason I stuck out the show when I kind of lost interest a couple episodes in is because my roommate pushed pretty hard for me to finish it. There was one scene that reminded him a lot of me. Before we get to that point, a major reason why Laios and Frieren work as well as they do is because their unique personalities are fundamental parts of the story, from personal character arcs to larger plot points. The method in which they're written doesn't compromise on their weirdness while still finding ways to make them very charming. Ultimately, these two, in conjunction with Denji and Mob and any other example I found, still end up eventually ticking a lot of those boxes. They're characters you want to root for and can empathize with. It just takes a while. There's a scene in Dungeon Meshi where Laios is frustrated by the fact that people wouldn't communicate more candidly with him. A major part of his arc is his inability to find a place where he feels he belongs. And in this conflict between him and one of his former party members, he asks why didn't this person just say how he was feeling instead of implying it. I relate a lot to Frieren, and even more to Laios. Which is funny given the fact that I've argued throughout this video that they're built off of an archetype that's less approachable. They're weird, and in some cases, the same type of weird I am. Even in the places where our personalities don't match up, to have characters that are abnormal in the spotlight, I think makes a lot of people feel seen. It's also a beautiful setting for a story. I love a traditional protagonist, and I also enjoy when things are changed up. That scene where Laios struggles to connect with those around him and find his place is the one my roommate really wanted me to see. It's funny because I kept asking as we were watching together, did you mean this scene or another? And he said, no, you'll probably be able to tell when we get there. And it was obvious. Something I've been asked a lot in my previous videos is to touch on this argument online about whether or not Laios and Frieren are autistic coded. And while I think it's a reasonable question, I kind of think it's the wrong one. Much more interesting to me is why people think that question is important. I think it's because they connected with the characters and want to be validated in their experience. And while art can be an incredibly social thing, I also think it's very individual. What moves you? What resonates with you? Because often great stories have lessons and truths that have a tangible impact on us. I've benefited a lot from online resources for autistic people. Previous partners have learned a lot from books on how to be in a relationship with someone on the spectrum. People too often start and stop at a label. I don't have an official diagnosis, and that's okay. There's a very realistic possibility that what I'm experiencing isn't actually autism. There might be a differential diagnosis. I just know that the resources help me. They've given me better tools to be kind to those around me and to treat them the way I'd like to. They've helped me understand a world that feels confusing and daunting. And I think these characters are similar, because in reality, they're just an amalgamation of all these different pieces of information, both practical and based in experience. Learning to write a character that feels real means taking bits and pieces from all over. So prescribing labels that the author didn't necessarily intend can lead to tons of situations where the audience feels like the author's disrespecting something much more complex and serious. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter whether or not these characters are autistic or whether or not I am. It mostly plays into just the actual impact. What do these characters mean to you? What information can I give to my friends and loved ones to give them context surrounding things that don't come to me very intuitively? I use the term weird a lot without a negative connotation because I deeply relate to it, and I think a lot of people do. So having characters that are less normative, who still fill that role as a protagonist and do it really well, is awesome. So cheers to this influx of well-written alien protagonists.